Silence before the storm. The moment I accepted the truth, something inside me changed. I expected tears. I expected anger. I expected to lose control. Instead, I became strangely calm. It wasn't the kind of calm that comes from peace. It was the kind that appears after your heart has been broken so completely that it no longer knows how to react. The shouting, the questions, and the desperate need for explanations all disappeared. In their place came silence. He noticed it almost immediately. "You've been quiet lately," he said one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner. I smiled politely. "Just tired." He accepted the answer without another question. That told me more than any confession ever could. The man who once noticed every small change in my mood no longer looked closely enough to see the difference between exhaustion and heartbreak. For the first time in years, I stopped asking where he had been. I stopped asking when he would be home. I stopped wondering who was sending him messages. Not because I no longer cared. Because I already knew enough. Now I needed certainty, not arguments. I realized that confronting him too soon would only give him time to rewrite the story. If I accused him without undeniable proof, every lie would become another explanation, every excuse another attempt to make me question my own instincts. I refused to let that happen. So I became patient. Very patient. Every morning looked exactly the same. I made coffee. We exchanged polite conversation. He kissed me goodbye before leaving for work. I smiled as if nothing had changed. The performance became part of my routine. The hardest role I had ever played was pretending that my heart wasn't quietly falling apart. While he believed everything was normal, I began paying attention to details with a level of focus I had never needed before. I started keeping a private journal. Not filled with emotions. Filled with facts. Dates. Times. Places. Conversations. Promises. Excuses. Each page became another piece of a puzzle. Every canceled dinner. Every unexpected business trip. Every inconsistency. Nothing dramatic. Just truth. One detail at a time. The more I observed, the more confident he became. He no longer seemed worried about hiding his behavior. Sometimes he left the room while his phone buzzed, certain I wouldn't look. Other times he casually mentioned meetings that sounded strangely familiar because I had already seen evidence that they weren't real. Confidence can make people careless. And carelessness reveals what caution hides. One Friday afternoon he called to say he would be working late again. His voice sounded relaxed. Almost rehearsed. "I probably won't be home until after 10. I answered exactly as I always had. "No problem. Be careful." After ending the call, I looked at the notes I had been collecting for weeks. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Whenever he claimed to be working late on Fridays, the same unusual expenses appeared a day or two later. Restaurants. Entertainment. Long drives. It wasn't coincidence anymore. It was routine. Still, I did nothing. At least, nothing he could see. Instead, I quietly organized everything. Digital copies. Printed documents. Screenshots. Receipts. Calendar entries. Nothing illegal. Nothing invasive. Only information that naturally came into my life or belonged to our shared responsibilities. If the truth ever needed to speak, I wanted it to speak clearly. Days turned into weeks. The silence between us grew heavier. Oddly enough, he seemed happier than he had in months. He laughed more. He whistled while getting ready for work. Sometimes he even brought me flowers without any special occasion. Months earlier, those gestures would have filled me with joy. Now they felt different. Not because flowers were meaningless, but because they arrived after trust had already disappeared. It was as though he believed small acts of kindness could erase large acts of dishonesty. One evening, we attended a friend's birthday gathering. I watched him from across the room as he talked confidently with everyone. He smiled. He laughed. He told stories as though nothing in his life was out of place. For a moment, I almost admired how convincing he could be. Then I noticed something else. Every few minutes, he glanced toward the front door. Waiting. Expecting someone. When another guest finally arrived, I saw a brief exchange between them. Only a glance. Only a smile. Gone within seconds. No one else seemed to notice. But I did. I didn't react. I simply remembered it. That had become my greatest strength. Not anger. Observation. Our mutual friends also began behaving differently around me. Some avoided eye contact. Others asked if I was doing okay for reasons they couldn't quite explain. A few looked uncomfortable whenever his name came up in conversation. Whether they
knew the truth or only suspected it, I couldn't tell. I didn't blame them. People often stay silent because they don't want to destroy someone else's happiness. The problem is that silence also protects deception. By now, I had stopped trying to protect an illusion. I wanted reality. Whatever it cost. Late one night, after he had gone to sleep, I walked through the house we had built together. The family photographs still lined the hallway. Vacation souvenirs still filled the shelves. The future we had planned together still existed on paper. Only now, every object felt like part of a carefully decorated stage. Beautiful. Comforting. False. I stood by the living room window and realized something important. Revenge wasn't about shouting. It wasn't about embarrassing someone in the heat of the moment. It wasn't about making them feel the same pain they had caused. Real justice required patience. Truth didn't need to scream. It only needed the right moment. From that night forward, my plan became simple. I wouldn't interrupt his lies. I would let them continue. Every new excuse added another piece to the truth. Every false promise made the final picture clearer. Without realizing it, he was building the case against himself. All I had to do was wait. Waiting wasn't easy. Some mornings I wanted to demand answers. Some nights I wanted to place every receipt, every note, every unanswered question on the table and ask one simple question. Why? But I never did. Because I knew something he didn't. He believed he was controlling the story. He believed I still trusted every word he said. He believed his secrets were safe. Confidence slowly replaced caution. Caution disappeared. Mistakes increased. The more comfortable he became, the less effort he made to keep the truth hidden. And with every passing day, the evidence grew stronger. One afternoon, as I organized the final pages of my journal, I looked down at everything I had collected over the past several weeks. It was no longer a collection of suspicions. It was a timeline. A complete story. One built entirely from his own choices. I closed the notebook, took a slow breath, and placed it safely inside a drawer. For the first time since the anonymous messages had begun, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't confused. I wasn't searching for answers anymore. I had them. Now I was simply waiting for the perfect moment to let the truth speak for itself. And when that moment finally arrived, nothing would ever be the same again. 5. Turning the tables. The strange thing about discovering the truth is that, eventually, the fear disappears. For weeks, I had lived with unanswered questions, restless nights, and a constant ache in my chest. But once every piece finally fit together, the uncertainty faded. In its place came something much stronger. Clarity. I wasn't searching for answers anymore. I already had them. Now I needed the right moment. Every receipt, every unexplained trip, every late-night message, every broken promise, and every carefully rehearsed excuse had become part of one complete story. Separately, they looked insignificant. Together, they revealed years of deception that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. I refused to let emotion ruin what patience had built. If I confronted him too early, he would deny everything. If I waited too long, he might erase the evidence. Timing had become everything. So I waited. Life continued exactly as it always had. Every morning, he kissed me goodbye before leaving for work. Every evening, he returned home with another story about meetings, deadlines, or unexpected responsibilities. I listened carefully. Not because I believed him. Because every lie added another missing piece. He had become so comfortable living two different lives that he no longer checked whether his stories matched the facts. That confidence became my greatest advantage. One afternoon, while we were having coffee together, he casually mentioned another business dinner planned for the weekend. "It shouldn't take long," he said with complete confidence. "I'll probably be back before midnight." I smiled. Sounds good. Inside, I already knew exactly where he claimed he would be. And I also knew he wouldn't be there. For the first time since everything began, I wasn't reacting to his choices. I was anticipating them. That realization changed everything. Instead of following emotions, I followed patterns. His routine had become remarkably predictable. The same excuses appeared on the same days. The same unexplained expenses followed similar schedules. Even the timing of his messages rarely changed. He thought he was being careful. In reality, he was repeating himself. People often believe repeating a lie makes it believable. Sometimes it simply makes it easier to recognize. Over the following days, I quietly prepared everything. I organized documents into chronological order. I labeled photographs. I compared dates with calendar entries. I saved copies of conversations that contradicted his explanations. Nothing dramatic. Nothing exaggerated. Only facts. Facts don't need to be louder than lies. They only need to exist. As I looked through everything one final time, I realized something unexpected. This wasn't about proving he had betrayed me. That part was already obvious. This was about making sure the truth could never be rewritten afterward. I wanted there to be no confusion. No misunderstanding. No opportunity for another carefully crafted story. He still had no idea. If anything, he seemed more relaxed than ever. He laughed more often. He talked about future vacations. He even started discussing home renovations we had once dreamed about together. Listening to those conversations felt surreal. The person sitting across from me was planning a future while quietly hiding the truth about the past. Sometimes I wondered whether he believed his own stories. Or whether he had simply repeated them so many times that honesty no longer felt familiar. One evening, he surprised me with tickets to a local event. "We haven't spent enough time together," he said with a smile. "A night out might be good for us." Months earlier, that gesture would have meant everything to me. Now it felt like another performance. Still, I accepted. Not because I wanted to rebuild what we had. Because I wanted him to believe nothing had changed. Throughout the evening, I noticed how relaxed he had become. He laughed without hesitation. He made plans for the following month. He spoke confidently about the future. Every word convinced him that his secrets remained hidden. He had stopped worrying. That was exactly what I needed. The more comfortable he became, the less careful he was. Small mistakes started appearing almost daily. One afternoon, he mentioned meeting a coworker whose office had actually been closed that entire week. Another day, he described attending an event on the same evening his financial records showed purchases somewhere entirely different. Each contradiction strengthened what I already knew. I no longer needed to search. The truth was practically introducing itself. There was one final step left. I needed to choose the right place. Not somewhere filled with anger. Not somewhere designed for humiliation. Simply somewhere he couldn't avoid the facts. A calm conversation. Clear evidence. No shouting. No accusations. Only
reality. The decision brought an unexpected sense of peace. For weeks, I had imagined countless dramatic confrontations. Instead, I realized something important. The strongest response wasn't revenge driven by emotion. It was confidence built on truth. People expect chaos when lies are exposed. They expect tears. Arguments. Desperation. He would expect all of that too. What he would never expect was calm. That calm became the final piece of my plan. The following Friday arrived. He repeated the familiar words one more time. "I've got another late meeting." I smiled warmly. "I hope it goes well." He thanked me, grabbed his keys, and walked toward the front door without the slightest hint of concern. He believed he had complete control. He believed every excuse had worked. He believed every secret remained protected. He never looked back. As the front door quietly closed behind him, I walked into my home office and opened the folder I had spent weeks preparing. Every page was in order. Every date matched. Every timeline connected. Every contradiction was documented. There was nothing left to investigate. Nothing left to guess. For the first time since receiving that anonymous message weeks earlier, I allowed myself a slow, steady breath. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. Only determination remained. He thought he was heading toward another ordinary evening. He had no idea that every decision he had made over the past several years had quietly led him to this exact moment. He believed he was still writing the story. What he didn't realize was that the final chapter had already been written. All that remained was for him to read it. And very soon, every lie he had carefully built would connect into one undeniable truth that neither of us could ever ignore again.